In Palmview Estate, Amina watches her neighbor Zainab's family rise while her own struggles to stay afloat, a thriving boutique, a private school run, a house that never seems to stop growing. When a single light stays lit in Zainab's upstairs window every night, long after the rest of the street goes dark, whispers begin spreading through the estate WhatsApp group. Money ritual. Hidden forces. The kind of suspicion that grows fastest in the dark. Consumed by envy and shame, Amina finally climbs to that upstairs window herself, and what she overhears breaks her heart in a way no rumor ever could. If you want to know what Amina discovered, let us get right into it. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more amazing stories like this. You can also do well to share to your loved ones. By the time the generators began their evening chorus across Palmview Estate, Amina had already counted her losses twice. She stood at the edge of her compound with one hand resting on the gate, watching the day thin out into dusk. The air had the dry, electric feel it got before rain, carrying the smell of dust, kerosene, frying onions, and hot asphalt cooling too slowly. Somewhere behind her, her younger son was complaining about homework. Somewhere ahead, a woman was laughing too loudly through an open window. And next door, behind the black gate with the polished lock and the neat row of potted plants, Zainab's driver was easing a silver SUV into the driveway as if the world had never once made him hurry. Amina looked away. It was never just the car. It was the way Zainab's house always seemed to move on a different rhythm from everyone else's. Her lights came on early. Her children always had the right shoes. Her boutique, which had started as one small store near the market, the same market where Amina still sat behind her own sewing machine, hoping for customers who no longer had money to spend, now had its own signboard, 2 assistants, and a delivery rider who came and went like he belonged there. It had not always been this way. Amina remembered, years ago, when both families had started from roughly the same place, 2 young couples renting their first small flats on the same street, both husbands driving borrowed cars to make ends meet, both wives selling whatever they could at whatever store would have them. She remembered Zainab in those early days, tired and unglamorous, haggling over the price of thread just like everyone else. Something had shifted since then, slowly, and then all at once. The way a tide goes out so gradually you don't notice the shoreline has changed until you're standing somewhere you don't recognize. Inside Amina's own house, things had stayed exactly where they'd started, or worse. The fan in the sitting room clicked before it turned. The roof rattled each time the wind changed its mind. The school fees for the term sat on the table in her mind like a debt that refused to move. Her husband, Yusuf, had gone out that morning with his taxi keys and returned with a tired face and a mechanic's estimate he had not yet named out loud, an estimate Amina suspected, from the particular way he avoided her eyes, was more than either of them could afford without selling something they could not easily replace. Amina carried a folded stack of uniforms indoors and dropped them onto the sofa. Her phone buzzed once in her wrapper pocket. A customer asking for patience on a payment. A school message reminding her of an unpaid balance. And then, just as she was about to put the phone down for the night, a voice note arrived from her sister-in-law that made her frown. "Have you noticed," the voice said, unhurried and knowing, "that woman next door doesn't sleep?" Amina did not reply. The words hung there anyway, the way certain sentences do, small, offhand things that lodge themselves somewhere behind the ribs and refuse to be dislodged by anything so simple as reason. That was how the talk started in Palmview Estate. Not with proof. Not with certainty. Just a sentence spoken by someone who sounded like they already knew the answer. By the next morning, it had become a question in the estate WhatsApp group. By evening, it had become something sharper. Why is her upstairs light always on? Why does that house keep expanding while everyone else's shrinks? Who runs a business like that, in this economy? No one said the last part out loud, not directly. They didn't need to. In the city, People learned to recognize suspicion even when it wore a polite face, dressed up in concern, in laughing emojis, in the careful phrase, "I'm not saying anything, but." Amina read the messages with her thumb hovering over the screen, telling herself she was not one of those women who believed every rumor that moved through a phone. She told herself she knew better than to envy another person's house. But each time she looked up from her own compound and saw that same upstairs light still burning in Zainab's room long after every other window on the street had gone dark, something uneasy gathered in her chest and refused to leave. It did not help that Zainab seemed entirely untouched by the strain that other women carried visibly, like a second skin. At the market, when everyone else was bargaining over every naira, counting coins twice before handing them over, Zainab moved with an easy certainty that made her seem, at times, to be operating in a different economy altogether. She greeted people by name, laughed without forcing it, and never once appeared to be in a hurry, even on the days her boutique was clearly overwhelmed with customers. She wore simple things beautifully, a plain wrapper, a clean headscarf, gold bangles that caught the light at exactly the right moment as she counted change or folded fabric. She was the kind of woman people described as settled, though no one, if pressed, could say precisely what that word was supposed to mean. Amina resented her for that too, the ease, the settledness, the sense that Zainab had somehow been let in on a secret the rest of the street had missed. The resentment did not arrive all at once. It grew the way certain plants grow, quietly at first, in places you aren't watching, until one day you look up and realize the vine has covered the whole wall. It showed up when Amina's own child asked, without malice, why Zainab's children went to the private school with the blue uniforms and he did not even have new shoes for church. It showed up when Amina counted her stock at the tailoring stall and realized she had been waiting 3 days for customers who simply were not coming, while 2 stalls down, a woman she barely knew whispered that Zainab's workshop had just taken on a 6th tailor. It showed up on the evenings Yusuf came home with his shirt damp at the back from hours spent idling in traffic for fares that barely covered the fuel, holding the kind of silence that meant the day had defeated him before he had even walked through the gate. And it showed up strongest, always, at night. Because every single night, after the street had settled and the generators across the estate had begun to cough off one by one into a heavy, humming silence, Amina noticed the light again. It came from the upstairs room in Zainab's duplex. Soft. Steady. Unmoving. Not the flickering blue-white of a television, not the quick sweep of a phone screen, but a low, constant, orange glow, the kind of light that suggested someone was awake, and staying awake, and had been staying awake for a very long time. At first, Amina told herself it was nothing. Maybe a lamp simply left on by mistake. Maybe one of the children afraid of the dark. Maybe Zainab had paperwork for the boutique that kept her up past midnight, the way business owners sometimes did. But the same light, night after night, week after week, began to feel less like an accident and more like a decision. As if it were guarding something. Or hiding something. By the end of the second week, the WhatsApp group had moved past curiosity into something closer to accusation, the way water moves from a simmer into a full boil without anyone quite marking the exact moment it happened. One woman claimed her cousin had once known a businesswoman in another estate who kept a light burning every night, for covering, the word left deliberately vague, the way words are left vague when everyone in the room already understands what they mean and no one wants to be the one who said it plainly. Another woman said a man from the estate next door had warned her, at a wedding of all places, that wealth in this city often came with a price nobody could see until it was far too late to refuse it. And then Auntie Comfort, who had lived on that street longer than almost anyone, and who treated the collection and redistribution of other people's business as a kind of civic duty, posted a message long enough that everyone had finished reading it before they realized quite how much poison it carried. Some people know they sleep because money know they allow them rest, she wrote, and the message sat there in the group beneath a scattering of laughing emojis and one lone, uncomfortable Prahan's reaction, and nobody, not one single person in that group of 40-some neighbors, said the obvious, gentler thing, which was that perhaps a woman's light stayed on for no darker reason than that she, too, like everyone else on that street, was simply carrying something heavy in the night. That was the message that stayed with Amina. She read it 3 times that night while Yusuf slept beside her, mouth slightly open, breathing in the slow, even rhythm of a man who had already given up asking the world for fairness and had settled instead for endurance. She placed the phone face down on the mattress and stared up at the ceiling, at the crack that ran from the light fixture to the corner, the crack Yusuf kept promising to patch and never quite found the money or the time to fix. Maybe, she admitted to herself in the particular honesty that only visits people in the very early hours, she wanted the rumor to be true. Not because she believed it, exactly, but because it would explain things. It would make the ache in her own life feel less personal, less like a verdict on her own worth, if another woman's success turned out to have a source darker than hard work and good fortune. It was easier, she was beginning to understand, to believe in hidden forces working against you than to sit with the plainer, harder truth, that sometimes life was simply, brutally unfair, for reasons that had nothing to do with justice at all. By Friday, Amina was tired enough of hunger, of comparison, of her own private shame, to stop pretending she was above the talk entirely. That evening, Zainab hosted a small gathering for her daughter's birthday. It was not one of those extravagant estate parties that announced itself to the whole sky with fireworks and a live band loud enough to rattle windows 3 streets over. It was smaller than that, quieter, and somehow that made it worse, elegant in a way that made quiet, careful people deeply uneasy. There were children in matching outfits, laughing and chasing each other around a small canopy tent. There was a cake with 2 colors of icing and a dusting of something that caught the light like real gold. There was music low enough not to offend the neighbors, and food plentiful enough to make even reluctant guests smile before they had spoken a single word. Amina attended because staying away would have looked, in a street like this one, like a statement in itself, an admission that she could not bear to watch. At the edge of the compound, she accepted a paper plate of jollof rice and stood near the drinks cooler, watching the guests drift around Zainab the way birds circle something bright. Zainab wore a simple lace dress and looked, up close, more tired than glamorous, though no one else seemed to notice this at all. Person after person approached her, asking, in one form or another, how she managed to do so much with such apparent grace. She answered each of them with the same easy, practiced smile. "You just do what must be done," she said, over and over, to guest after guest, as though the sentence cost her nothing. Amina almost laughed at that, standing alone with her plate of rice. It sounded too neat, too clean, too much like the kind of answer wealthy people gave when they wanted the rest of the world to stop asking questions they had grown tired of answering honestly. Later, when the music had faded a little and the guests had settled into eating, Amina found herself standing near the side passage that led toward the back of the house. She was not looking for anything in particular. At least, that was what she told herself, the way people always tell themselves something gentler than the truth in the moment just before they do something they already suspect they shouldn't. But through the partly open kitchen door, she heard Zainab's voice, lowered, speaking first to the nanny, then to her daughter, then, more quietly still, to someone upstairs. A child called out for water. And then there was a faint, broken sound drifting down from above. Not music. Not the low hum of a generator. A voice. Amina went very still. It was too soft, at first, to make out clearly, just a thread of sound carried on the evening air. But then it sharpened, note by note, into a melody Amina recognized instantly, pulled up from somewhere far back in her own childhood, an old lullaby her own mother used to hum on the nights the power went out and the whole house dissolved into a comforting darkness that no longer felt frightening because of the song holding it together. Amina stood there, frozen, listening. The singing came again, thin and visibly tired, the way a song sounds when it has been repeated too many times already that same week by someone who has stopped noticing they are still singing it. Not a performance meant for an audience. Not an incantation drawing power out of the dark. A lullaby, plain and exhausted and entirely human. Something inside Amina's chest loosened and tightened at exactly the same moment, in a way she did not yet have words for. That should, perhaps, have been the end of it, a moment of doubt, a private softening, a rumor quietly abandoned. But shame and fear do not always move in straight lines, and by the following week, with Yusuf's cough returning worse than before and no money for a proper hospital visit, Amina found the old, darker thoughts crowding back in, louder than the lullaby had been. There was, on the far side of the market, past the mechanic's yard and the row of phone-charging stalls, a small unmarked building that two of Amina's own customers had once mentioned to her in careful, lowered voices, the kind of place a woman visited quietly and never discussed again afterward. Amina had always told herself she would never need such a place. She was a church-going woman. She did not entertain such things. And yet, on a Tuesday afternoon while her children were at school, she found herself walking toward it anyway, her feet carrying her forward faster than her conscience could catch up. Inside, a woman known only as Aya Kobiisi sat behind a low table scattered with cowrie shells and a small brass bowl of water. She did not ask why Amina had come. She only gestured for her to sit, and threw the shells across the table, studying their scatter in a long, unhurried silence. "Someone close to you prospers," she said finally, "while your own hands stay empty no matter how you labor." Amina's breath caught. "Yes. You believe it is not by ordinary means." "I don't know what I believe anymore," Amina admitted, her voice smaller than she intended. "I only know my husband is sick, my children go without, and my neighbor's light burns all night while I ration my own generator fuel by the hour." The old woman gathered her shells slowly into one weathered palm. "You have come to ask for a covering over your own house," she said. "Or you have come to ask for something with teeth in it, something to turn back what you believe has been taken from you and given to another." Amina thought of her son asking about swimming lessons he would never have. She thought of Yusuf's rattling cough in the dark. She thought of the WhatsApp message she had read 3 times before finally setting her phone face down on the bed. "I don't know," she whispered. "I only want it to stop." Aya Kobiisi studied her for a long moment, something careful and unreadable passing behind her eyes, not quite judgment, but something close to caution, the particular caution of someone who has seen this exact moment play out before, in other women, on other afternoons. "Go home tonight," she said at last. "Watch that window one more time, with your own 2 eyes, before you ask me to work anything against her. A wise woman does not throw a stone into the dark without first knowing what she is truly aiming at. Come back to me tomorrow, if you still want this done." It was not the answer Amina had come for. But there was a weight in the old woman's voice that left no comfortable room to argue, and so Amina walked home through the fading afternoon light with those words sitting uneasily in her chest, and that night, for the first time with true and deliberate purpose, she resolved to find out, once and for all, exactly what happened behind her neighbor's window after the rest of the estate had finally gone to sleep. She waited until well past midnight, when even the estate's night guard had gone quiet at his post by the gatehouse, and the last restless dog somewhere down the street had finally stopped barking. Then Amina slipped out of her own compound, crossed the narrow gap where the dividing hedge grew thin between the 2 properties, and crept along the side wall of Zainab's duplex until she reached the base of the drainpipe beneath the upstairs window, the one that always glowed orange long after every other light on the street had gone dark. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain it could be heard through the concrete itself. She climbed 2 low steps of an old plant stand pushed against the wall, just enough to bring her ear level with the small gap where the window had been left open to let the generator's noise escape, and she listened. At first, it was exactly what it had always sounded like from a distance, a low murmur, rising and falling, indistinct. But this close, for the very first time, the sounds resolved into actual words, and what Amina heard stopped her breath entirely. It was not an incantation. It was not the voice of a woman drawing wealth out of the dark hours at her neighbor's quiet expense. It was a lullaby, the very same one, worn thin now, cracked with the particular exhaustion of a song repeated far too many nights in a row for far too many years. Amina leaned closer, and through the narrow gap in the curtain, she finally allowed herself to look inside. What she saw undid, in a single silent moment, everything she had spent 2 months allowing herself to believe. On a hospital-style bed pushed against the far wall lay an old woman, frail, impossibly thin, her eyes open but unfocused, her thin hands trembling where they clutched the edge of a blanket. This was Mama Edaora, Amina realized with a jolt, Musa's own mother, whom no one on the street had seen in over a year, whom everyone had simply assumed had gone up country to live with relatives. She had gone nowhere. She had been here the entire time, hidden behind this glowing window, her mind slipping further from her with each passing season. And there, seated on a low stool beside the bed, was Zainab, not chanting a spell, not siphoning fortune from the dark hours, but holding her mother-in-law's trembling hand and singing the same one lullaby over and over, because it was the only thing that calmed the old woman enough to let her finally rest. There now, Mama, Zainab murmured between the verses, her voice raw with a tiredness that went far deeper than a single sleepless night could explain. I'm here. You're safe. Sleep now. The old woman's grip slowly loosened. Zainab kept humming anyway, even after her mother-in-law's eyes had finally closed, because, Amina understood now, watching from the dark, this was not the first night this had happened, and it would certainly not be the last. This was simply what occurred, every single night, behind that glowing upstairs window. Not a ritual for wealth. A daughter-in-law who had chosen, quietly, without a single soul on that street ever knowing, to spend nearly every night of the last 3 years keeping a frightened, fading old woman from drowning alone in the dark. Amina felt something crack open in her chest. And then Zainab spoke again, softer still, and this time it was not a lullaby at all, but a prayer, and the words in it stopped Amina's breath a second time, more completely than the first. And please, Lord, watch over Yusuf's house too, Zainab whispered, her eyes still fixed on her sleeping mother-in-law's face. His cough hasn't left him. Give Amina strength, she works harder than anyone I know at that market store, and still business doesn't move for her the way it moves for us. I don't understand it, Lord, only that it isn't fair, and ask you to be fair where I cannot fix it myself with my own 2 hands. Forgive me for not saying it was me who left the envelope through their gate last month. I didn't want her to feel small over it. Let her son get his new shoes before Sunday, wherever the money seems to have come from. Amina's knees very nearly gave out beneath her. The envelope. 3 weeks earlier, Amina had found a plain white envelope with cash inside, pushed halfway under her front gate, no name attached, no note explaining it. She had assumed it was a long overdue repayment from one of Yusuf's old taxi customers, quietly settling a debt. She had never once imagined it could be the very neighbor she had spent 2 long months resenting. The very neighbor whose flourishing business had felt, to Amina, like a personal wound inflicted on purpose. The very neighbor she had, only the day before, sat across from a stranger's low table asking how to strike back at. Amina pressed her hand hard over her own mouth to keep from making a sound, and she stood there in the dark outside her neighbor's window for a long, long time, weeping silently, until her legs finally found the strength to carry her back across the thin hedge to her own side of the fence. She did not sleep at all that night, and by the time morning arrived, her mind was entirely made up. She went to Zainab's gate before the estate's generators had even started their morning hum, while the compound was still quiet and her own thin thread of courage still held. Zainab answered the gate herself, already half-dressed for the boutique, though up close, in the honest light of early morning. Amina finally allowed herself to see what she had never once let herself look for before, the deep shadows beneath her neighbor's eyes, the fine thinness in a face that spoke not of stress over money, but of years spent without a single full, unbroken night of rest. Amina. You're up early. Whatever careful words Amina had rehearsed on the walk over abandoned her completely, and the truth simply spilled out instead, unpolished and raw. I know about your mother-in-law, she said. I know it was you who left the envelope at my gate. I heard you last night, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have been there at all, but I heard you praying, for Yusuf, for my son, for me. And I can't carry this another single day without telling you the truth. I was jealous of you, Zainab. So jealous it turned into something ugly inside me. I let the group's talk get into my head, and it grew there like something with roots. I went to a woman on the other side of the market to ask her to work something against you. She said all of it plainly, without softening a single word, because she had decided in the sleepless hours of the night that Zainab deserved the whole truth, not some gentler, more forgivable version of it. Zainab did not flinch, though she would have had every right to. She stood quietly for a long moment, studying Amina's face with an expression that held more weariness than shock. I've known about the group messages for months, she said finally, gently. I don't fight them, because fighting them would mean explaining to the whole estate that Musa's mother's mind is slipping away from her, and on her better days, she still has enough of herself left to feel real shame about that. I decided her dignity mattered more to me than my own reputation. She paused. I didn't know it had gone as far as someone's low table across the market. I'm glad you turned back before it went further. I don't understand how you can even stand to look at me right now, Amina said, her voice finally breaking. I wished you harm. For months, quietly, in my own heart, I wished you ill. Zainab reached out and took both of Amina's hands in her own, rough with fieldwork and fabric and years of labor, warm despite the cool morning air still clinging to the compound. Do you know why the boutique has grown the way it has these past 2 years, while so many shops on that same street have quietly closed? She asked. It isn't magic, Amina. It never was. Musa's uncle taught him how to source fabric directly, cutting out the middlemen who mark everything up 3 times over. That's the whole secret. An ordinary thing. I would have told you myself, gladly, the very first time you asked me, if you had only asked me, instead of asking a phone screen what it imagined was happening behind my window. Amina felt a fresh, plainer shame rise in her chest, not the shame of nearly doing something terrible, though that shame remained too, but the simpler shame of 2 entire months spent watching, envying, and fearing, when the door beside her own had been open the whole time, waiting only to be knocked on. I was too proud, she admitted quietly. And too afraid of what I'd feel, hearing an answer that simple. Envy is like that, Zainab said, her voice gentle. It would rather believe in a ritual than in an ordinary neighbor doing tiring, ordinary work in the dark that no one claps for. A ritual, at least, isn't your fault to fix. An ordinary neighbor makes you look at your own field, your own store, your own house, and wonder what you might still learn, if only you asked. They stood together at the gate for a long moment, the thin hedge trembling gently in the morning breeze between their 2 compounds, and something that had quietly gone rotten between them over 2 long months began, just as quietly, to heal. In the weeks that followed, Zainab connected Amina to Musa's fabric contact directly, cutting the same cost from Amina's own supply chain that had once made the gap between their 2 businesses feel so unbridgeable. Within 2 seasons, Amina's tailoring store had grown enough to take on her first apprentice, a quiet teenage girl from 2 streets over who reminded Amina, in small ways, of herself at that age. But it was not the business that changed the most on that street. It was Amina herself. She began taking turns sitting with Mama Edora in the evenings, so that Zainab, for the first time in 3 long years, could sleep an unbroken night, twice a week, sometimes 3. Amina learned the old woman's lullaby by heart, hummed it in the exact key that seemed to calm her breathing fastest, and on the nights it was her turn, her own children, overhearing the melody drift faintly over the fence, began humming it themselves as they fell asleep, until the song no longer belonged to one house or the other, but to both, the way the hedge between the 2 compounds had never truly belonged to either family alone. Yusuf's cough finally led him to a proper clinic visit, one Amina insisted on, using money she no longer felt ashamed to admit had come, in part, from Zainab's quiet insistence that she take it as a loan between neighbors, not a gift, though both women understood it would likely never be repaid in any currency but kindness. The doctor caught the problem early enough to treat it fully, and within a month, the rattling in his chest had quieted along with so much else in their small, crowded house. When Auntie Comfort tried, one evening in the WhatsApp group, to revive the old rumor about strange lights and stranger sounds, hoping perhaps to reclaim some of the attention the story had once brought her, it was Amina, of all the people on that street, who answered first, and answered plainly, in writing, where the whole group could see it. "There is no strange thing in that house," she wrote. "Only care. Only sleeplessness. Only one woman holding up what no one else on this street ever noticed was falling. I know, because I've sat beside that light myself." No one replied for a long time after that message landed. Then, slowly, someone sent a single thumbs up. Then another person changed the subject entirely, the way conversations do when a truth has finally arrived that no rumor can survive standing beside. The old suspicion did not return after that. Rumors rarely do, once someone close enough to have seen the truth is willing to say it plainly, in a place everyone can see, without flinching. By the time the rains came again that year, the two houses no longer looked, from the street, like opposites standing side by side out of mere coincidence. They looked like neighbors. Real ones, in every sense the word had ever meant. The upstairs light still burned some nights, just as it always had. But now Amina knew exactly why. And when she looked up and saw that same soft, steady glow behind the curtain, she no longer felt the old, familiar sting rise in her chest. She felt something else instead. Something quieter, and far more lasting. She felt recognition. Judgment is easy. Understanding takes courage. So here's the truth this story leaves us with: envy blinds us, but understanding heals us. Amina almost destroyed a friendship, and a good woman's peace, chasing a rumor that wasn't even true. What's the lesson for you? Before you judge someone's blessing, ask about their burden first. Drop a comment and tell me, what did this story teach you? And if it moved you even a little, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you next time.